When the truth finally came to light, it was too late to turn back. Are you ready for what you're about to discover? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Jess Taylor, a young 28-year-old officer, joined the police force just 3 years ago, bringing with her a burning idealism and an unwavering determination to make a difference. With brown hair always tied in a neat bun and sharp green eyes, Jenny stood out for her compassionate approach and her ability to connect with the community. Her background in psychology helped her handle delicate situations with a unique sensitivity. Tom Spencer, on the other hand, was a 52-year-old veteran with more than 2 decades of service. Tall and broad-shouldered, with gray hair cut close to his scalp, Tom emanated an aura of authority that intimidated both criminals and rookies alike. Known for his hardline approach and impeccable arrest record, he was respected by many in the department as an old-school cop. The two formed an unlikely duo: Jenny, with her optimism and desire for reform, and Tom, deeply rooted in traditions and old methods. As they patrolled the city streets, their differences became increasingly evident. Jenny sought to build bridges with the community, while Tom preferred to maintain a professional distance, sometimes bordering on coldness. Despite their differences, both shared a commitment to duty and a dedication to police work. However, as they worked together, tensions between their divergent philosophies began to build, creating a microcosm of the larger struggles faced by the department and the city as a whole. As Jenny and Tom patrolled the city's diverse neighborhoods, Tom's racist opinions began to subtly but undeniably surface. Initially, they were seemingly harmless comments about certain types of people in specific neighborhoods. Tom often made observations about how some ethnic groups always caused trouble, disguising his prejudice as street experience. During a routine stop involving a young African-American man, Tom displayed disproportionate aggression, justifying his actions with decontextualized crime statistics. Jenny noticed how he consistently applied racial profiling, disproportionately stopping minority drivers for minor infractions. In conversations in the patrol car, Tom expressed nostalgia for times when, according to him, cops were respected and criminals feared the law. He often linked the rise in crime to the city's increasing diversity, ignoring complex socioeconomic factors. Tom's jokes in the locker room, laden with racial stereotypes, were met with nervous laughter by some colleagues and uncomfortable silence by others. He justified his behavior as cop humor, insensitive to the impact of his words. As his opinions became more evident, Jenny noticed how this affected Tom's interactions with the community. His differential treatment of suspects based on race was subtle but consistent, reflecting a deeply rooted bias that influenced his professional decisions. Tom made no effort to hide his frustration with recent changes in the police department. In meetings, he often expressed his displeasure with the new community engagement policies and cultural sensitivity training, labeling them as politically correct nonsense that interfered with real police work. His irritation was palpable when discussing the new use of force guidelines. Tom vehemently argued that these restrictions tied officers' hands and put them in danger. He saw the implementation of body cameras as a lack of trust in officers, rather than a tool for transparency. The department's diversification initiatives were another point of contention. Tom frequently grumbled about quotas and lowered standards, insinuating that new recruits from minority groups weren't as qualified as their predecessors. In locker room conversations, Tom lamented the good old days when cops had more autonomy. He viewed the changes as a capitulation to the pressures of civil rights groups and weak politicians, ignoring the underlying reasons for these reforms. His frustration sometimes manifested in passive resistance to new policies or sarcastic comments during mandatory training sessions. Tom represented an old guard reluctant to adapt, seeing each change as an erosion of the values and methods he considered fundamental to effective policing. Jess Taylor found herself increasingly uncomfortable with her partner Tom Spencer's attitudes. Her discomfort was a silent but growing presence that hung over every shift they shared. While Tom openly expressed his controversial views, Jenny struggled internally with how to respond. Initially, Jenny tried to rationalize Tom's behavior as the product of a different generation and years of tough experiences on the streets. She hoped that, with time and exposure to new ideas, Tom might change. However, as days turned into weeks, that hope dwindled. Jenny's silence wasn't due to a lack of conviction, but rather a complex tangle of factors. As a rookie officer, she was aware of the department's unwritten hierarchy and the respect many had for Tom. She feared that speaking out might isolate her or label her as a troublemaker, potentially harming her career. Additionally, Jenny wrestled with the concept of police loyalty. Reporting a colleague was seen as a grave violation of the police code of silence. She wondered if confronting Tom directly might compromise their partnership and, by extension, her safety on the streets. Jenny's discomfort manifested in small gestures, a disapproving look here, a subtle change of subject there. She made an effort to compensate for Tom's attitudes by being extra attentive to members of the community he treated with disdain. At night, Jenny lay awake, debating with herself about the right course of action. Her silence weighed on her, a burden that was increasingly difficult to bear. The city was a mosaic of contrasts, a blend of prosperity and poverty, tradition and change. In the center, glass and steel skyscrapers rose as monuments to economic progress, housing multinational corporations and tech startups. The streets of the financial district buzzed with the energy of well-dressed professionals and awestruck tourists. Just a few blocks east, the scene changed drastically. Historic neighborhoods, once grand, now showed signs of decay. Victorian houses, with their intricate architecture, stood as reminders of a bygone era, many of them divided into overcrowded apartments. To the north, immigrant communities had created vibrant enclaves, with colorful street markets and the aroma of cuisines from around the world. These neighborhoods were a testament to the city's diversity, but also faced challenges of integration and gentrification. The south of the city was marked by housing projects and industrial areas. Abandoned factories stood alongside new developments, symbolizing the city's struggle to reinvent itself economically. Green parks dotted the urban landscape, offering respite from the city's hustle and bustle. However, even these spaces reflected socioeconomic divides, with some well-maintained and others neglected. The invisible lines that separated these neighborhoods were well known to the residents. Each area had its own personality, challenges, and relationship with the authorities. These divisions were not only geographical but also racial, economic, and cultural, creating a complex web of tensions and alliances that shaped the city's dynamics. Institutional racism permeated the city's structures like an underground current, subtle but powerful, influencing systems and institutions in ways not always immediately visible. In the police department, it manifested in seemingly neutral policies that, in practice, disproportionately affected communities of color. Arrest and stop-and-frisk statistics revealed troubling patterns. Predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods experienced a more intense police presence and higher rates of arrests for minor crimes. Meanwhile, white-collar crimes in more affluent areas often went unnoticed or were treated with more leniency. The criminal justice system as a whole reflected these disparities. From bail setting to sentencing, significant discrepancies existed based on race and socioeconomic status. Rehabilitation programs and alternatives to incarceration were more accessible in certain communities than in others. In the education system, schools in minority neighborhoods struggled with limited resources, high teacher turnover rates, and outdated curricula. This created a cycle of disadvantage that extended to job opportunities and social mobility. Access to quality health care also followed racial and economic lines, with hospitals in underserved areas facing chronic overcrowding and lack of equipment. These systemic disparities were often justified or ignored by those in power, perpetuating a status quo that privileged certain groups while marginalizing others. The introduction of these themes of institutional racism set the backdrop for the conflicts and challenges Jenny and Tom would face in their daily police work. The tension within the police department was palpable, a taut string ready to snap at any moment. On the surface, there was a facade of unity and shared purpose, but beneath this appearance, conflicting currents of ideology and practice created a volatile environment. The most evident division was between the old guard, represented by veterans like Tom Spencer, and the new generation of officers, exemplified by Jess Taylor. The veterans viewed recent changes, from new use of force policies to community policing initiatives, as an affront to their experience and a capitulation to external political pressures. They resented what they perceived as an erosion of their authority and autonomy. On the other hand, the younger and more progressive officers embraced these changes, seeing them as necessary steps to restore community trust and address long-standing systemic issues. They often felt silenced or marginalized by a departmental culture that valued conformity over innovation. This tension manifested in small daily interactions, glances exchanged during team meetings, whispered conversations in the locker room, and the subtle formation of factions within the department. Minority officers, though underrepresented, felt the added weight of navigating these turbulent waters while dealing with their own unique challenges. The department's leadership was torn between the need to implement reforms and the desire to maintain the morale and loyalty of veteran officers. This indecision often resulted in confused or poorly implemented policies, exacerbating the tensions further. As external pressures for accountability and reform increased, the internal atmosphere of the department became increasingly charged. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark, with each interaction between officers, each decision made in the field, potentially triggering a larger conflict. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over the busy streets as Tom and Jenny's patrol car weaved through traffic. The air conditioning hummed softly, barely masking the silent tension between the partners. Tom, with his hands firmly on the wheel, scanned the streets with experienced eyes, his rigid posture reflecting years of patrol. Jenny, for her part, alternated between watching the street and stealing furtive glances at Tom, her face a mask of professionalism that barely concealed her internal unease. The last few weeks of partnership had been an exercise in patience and diplomacy for her. They passed through diverse neighborhoods, each telling a different story of the city. Children played in worn-down parks in low-income areas, while hurried executives crossed streets in the financial district. The disparity was stark and familiar. The radio occasionally crackled with routine calls, a domestic dispute here, a triggered alarm there. Tom responded with short grunts, his attention never fully leaving the road. Jenny used these moments to study the faces of pedestrians, seeking to build a silent connection with the community she had sworn to protect. She noticed details that escaped Tom: a hesitant smile, a look of fear, the nuances of urban life that her partner seemed to ignore. As the afternoon wore on, the atmosphere in the patrol car grew denser. The differences between the two officers, usually kept under a thin layer of professionalism, threatened to surface at any moment. The traffic flowed monotonously when something caught Tom's sharp eye. A black sedan, a recent model, glided smoothly in the right lane. Behind the wheel was a middle-aged African-American woman, her curly hair pulled back in an elegant bun, dressed in an impeccable executive suit. Tom straightened in his seat, his eyes never leaving the vehicle. "Look at that," he murmured, more to himself than to Jenny. His partner followed his gaze, frowning slightly as she noticed nothing out of the ordinary. The sedan obeyed all speed limits, signaled appropriately at turns, and maintained a safe distance from other vehicles. The driver, who they would later know as L. Daniels, displayed a relaxed posture, focused on the road ahead. Jenny watched Tom with growing apprehension. She knew that look on his face, a mix of suspicion and determination that usually preceded his most controversial decisions. "Something's wrong with that car," Tom declared, his voice laden with unfounded certainty. Jenny opened her mouth to question, but hesitated, weighing the consequences of challenging her senior partner. Meanwhile, Elle Daniels continued her route, completely unaware of Tom's intense scrutiny. Her hand occasionally adjusted the rearview mirror or changed the radio station, everyday gestures that, to Tom's eyes, seemed loaded with suspicious meaning. The black sedan turned a corner, and Tom subtly accelerated to keep it in view. The tension in the patrol car was palpable, with Jenny torn between her instinct to question and the pressure to support her partner. With a sharp turn of the wheel, Tom turned on the patrol lights, the siren cutting through the afternoon air. "We're pulling that car over," he announced, his voice filled with a determination that left no room for argument. Jenny felt a knot form in her stomach. She racked her memory, trying to recall any infraction that could justify the stop. The black sedan had been a model of responsible driving since they spotted it. "Tom," she began hesitantly, "what's the reason for the stop?" Tom shot a hard look at his partner. "Trust my gut, rookie. Something's not right here." His voice was laden with years of experience, but also with deep-seated prejudices that Jenny was beginning to recognize with growing discomfort. The black sedan, obedient to the law, signaled and smoothly pulled over to the side of the road. Ella Daniels, visible through the rear window, maintained a calm posture, her hands visible on the wheel, a gesture that Jenny recognized as a conscious precaution. As Tom parked the patrol car behind the sedan, Jenny fought internally. Her training and sense of duty clashed with a growing feeling that something was fundamentally wrong in this situation. She knew that stops without probable cause were not only unethical, but potentially illegal. "Let's go," Tom grunted, already opening his door. Jenny followed, her heart racing. She wondered how she could navigate this situation without compromising her integrity or antagonizing her partner. As they approached the stopped vehicle, Jenny made a silent promise to herself to stay alert for any abuse of power. As they approached the black sedan, Jenny gathered the courage to voice her concerns. "Tom," she said in a low but firm voice, "I'm not sure we have enough grounds for this stop. We didn't observe any traffic violations." Tom shot her an irritated glance. "Listen, Thompson. Sometimes you have to trust a cop's instinct. Something's off here, and we're going to find out what." Jenny felt a wave of frustration. "But instinct isn't a legal basis for a stop. We need probable cause or, at the very least, reasonable suspicion." "What exactly did you see that justifies this?" Tom stopped abruptly, turning to face her. "Look, if you want to be a good cop, you need to learn to read the streets. That car, in this neighborhood, something's out of place." Jenny frowned, recognizing the racial subtext in Tom's words. "A well-maintained car isn't cause for suspicion, Tom. We're risking a civil rights violation here." The tension between them was palpable. Tom snorted in frustration. "Look, if you can't handle real police work, maybe you should go back to the academy. Now, let's do our job." Jenny felt torn between her duty as a partner and her ethical obligation. She decided that, while she couldn't stop the stop at this moment, she would document every aspect of the interaction carefully. She made a mental note to discuss the incident with her supervisor later, determined not to let such questionable practices go unnoticed. Tom approached the driver's window with firm steps, Jenny following closely, her discomfort evident in her tense posture. Ella Daniels, the driver of the black sedan, lowered the window with a soft hum, her face a mask of calm composure. "Good afternoon, officers," Elle greeted, her voice firm and polite. "Is there something I can help you with?" Tom leaned in, his eyes scanning the vehicle's interior. "License and registration, please," he demanded, offering no explanation for the stop. Without hesitation, Elle reached for the glove compartment, her movements slow and deliberate. "Certainly, officer. Here they are," she said, handing over the requested documents. Jenny watched the interaction closely, noting Elle's relaxed posture, her hands always visible, her respectful tone. It was clear that Elle was familiar with traffic stop protocol and was doing everything she could to keep the situation calm. "Ms. Mondavis," Tom began, examining the documents, "do you know why we pulled you over today?" Elle shook her head slightly. "No, officer, I'm not sure. I was observing the speed limit and all traffic laws, as far as I know." Jenny noticed a slight tremor in Ella's voice, the only indication that the situation was affecting her more than her calm appearance suggested. The younger officer felt a wave of empathy, recognizing the effort Elle was making to maintain composure in the face of what clearly seemed like an unjustified stop. "Well, we have our reasons," Tom replied vaguely, his posture becoming more rigid. Jenny noticed that Ella's cooperation seemed to be frustrating her partner, who was clearly expecting to find some reason to justify his unfounded suspicions. Tom's attitude visibly shifted, his growing frustration manifesting in an increasingly aggressive tone. "Where are you coming from, Mrs. Davis?" he asked brusquely, emphasizing Mrs., in a way that sounded more like an insult than a courtesy. Ella, maintaining her composure, calmly replied, "I'm coming back from work, officer. I'm an executive at the tech company downtown." Tom made a skeptical sound. "Is that so? And what kind of an executive drives a car like this through this neighborhood?" Jenny felt her discomfort increase. Tom's condescending tone was unmistakable, laden with poorly disguised prejudice. "This is my personal car, officer," Ella explained patiently. "I live a few blocks from here. This is the most direct route to my home." Tom leaned in closer to the window, his gaze intense and accusatory. "Are you sure you're not involved in any suspicious activity? Maybe something that would explain how you can afford a car like this?" Jenny intervened, trying to de-escalate the situation. "Ms. Davis, I'm sorry, but we need to ask these questions as part of our standard procedure." Ella turned to Jenny, a brief flash of gratitude in her eyes. "I understand, officer. No, I'm not involved in any illegal activity. I'm a respectable professional and a law-abiding citizen." Tom, clearly dissatisfied with the answers, continued to press. "Do you have something to hide, Mrs. Davis? Because your behavior is looking very suspicious to me." Jenny watched in horror as her partner turned an unjustified stop into a hostile interrogation based on nothing more than racial and class-based prejudices. The tension reached its peak when Tom, visibly frustrated by the lack of evidence to justify his suspicions, decided to escalate the situation. "Mrs. Davis," he said, his tone authoritative, "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle. We have reason to believe there may be something illegal here, and we're going to conduct a search of your car." Jenny felt a knot in her stomach. She knew there was no legal basis for this demand. Ella had shown no suspicious behavior. There were no visible signs of illegal activity, and the stop itself was already questionable. Ella, still maintaining her composure but with a perceptible tremor in her voice, replied, "Officer, with all due respect, I don't understand what the reason would be to search my vehicle. I did not consent to a search, and as far as I know, you have no probable cause." Tom straightened, his posture becoming more threatening. "Look here, if you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't object to a simple search. Your resistance is only making me more suspicious." Jenny could no longer stay silent. "Tom," she said in a low but firm voice, "we need to talk for a moment." She motioned for them to step away from the car. Tom shot an irritated look at his partner, but reluctantly followed her. "We have no legal basis for this search," Jenny whispered urgently. We're risking a civil rights violation." Tom snorted in anger. "You still have a lot to learn about real police work, rookie. Sometimes you have to push a little to get results." As the two officers argued, Ella remained in the car, her expression a mix of fear and determination. The situation was about to reach a critical point, with Tom's actions threatening not only Elle's rights, but also the integrity of the police department. With relentless determination, Tom began the search of Elle Daniels' black sedan. His movements were abrupt and aggressive, reflecting his growing frustration and deep-seated prejudices. He violently opened the driver's door, nearly ripping it off its hinges. "Get out of the car now," Tom ordered, his voice laden with unjustified authority. Ella calmly complied, keeping her hands visible as she stepped away from the vehicle. Tom began rifling through the car's interior with alarming intensity. He opened the glove compartment, scattering papers and personal belongings across the car floor. His fingers ran along the seams of the seats, searching for any irregularities that might justify his unfounded suspicions. Jenny watched the scene with growing discomfort, torn between her duty to support her partner and her sense of justice. She noticed how Tom completely ignored standard search procedures, his approach more like a personal mission than a professional investigation. The sound of objects being tossed and rummaged through echoed in the quiet street. Tom forcefully opened the trunk, rifling through Ella's shopping bags and personal items without the slightest care or respect. As the search intensified, the tension in the air became palpable. Ella remained standing, her face a mask of calm resignation, while Tom continued his frantic search for something, anything, that could validate his racially motivated suspicions. The scene was a disturbing testament to police abuse of power, with Tom acting more like an inquisitor than a public servant charged with protecting and serving. Jenny felt her heart race as she noticed a subtle, suspicious movement from Tom. As he rifled through the center console of Ella's car, his right hand made a quick, almost imperceptible motion. To her horror, Jenny realized that Tom was planting evidence. A small plastic bag, which had definitely not been there before, appeared as if by magic between Tom's fingers. With a fluid, practiced motion, he slid the bag into a crack in the console, ensuring it remained partially visible. Jenny felt a wave of nausea. She knew she was witnessing not only a serious violation of Ella's rights, but also a criminal act on the part of her own partner. The internal conflict she had been feeling in recent weeks reached its peak at that moment. Her eyes darted quickly between Tom, busy discovering the evidence he had planted, and Ella, who remained eerily calm on the sidewalk. Jenny wondered if Ella had seen what happened, if she was also aware of the farce unfolding. The young officer felt the weight of a monumental decision on her shoulders. Reporting Tom would mean breaking the blue code of silence, potentially ruining her career before it even began. On the other hand, remaining silent would make her complicit in a blatant injustice. Jenny took a deep breath, her mind racing to find the best course of action. She knew that the next moments could determine not only Elle's fate, but also the course of her own career and conscience. With poorly disguised triumph, Tom emerged from Elle's car holding the small plastic bag between his thumb and forefinger. His face displayed a mixture of satisfaction and false surprise, a performance worthy of a mediocre actor. Well, what do we have here?" Tom announced, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He held up the bag, which contained a white powder, for everyone to see. "Looks like we found something interesting, Mrs. Davis." Jenny felt her stomach churn. She knew that what Tom held wasn't a discovery, but a fabrication, a tangible lie that threatened to destroy the life of an innocent woman. Tom approached Elle, brandishing the bag as if it were a trophy. "Care to explain this?" he asked, his tone accusatory and condescending. Elle looked at the bag, her face a mask of calm that contrasted sharply with the gravity of the situation. Jenny watched closely, expecting to see shock, fear, or outrage on Elle's face. Instead, she saw only a resignation that was almost expectant. "Officer," Elle began, her voice surprisingly firm, "I can assure you that this does not belong to me and was not in my car before this stop." Tom laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Of course it wasn't. I bet you don't even know how it got there, do you?" Jenny felt the weight of the moment. She knew she was witnessing a blatant injustice, an abuse of power that went against everything she believed the badge stood for. Tom's discovery was nothing more than an elaborate setup, an act of institutionalized racism taking shape before her eyes. Elaine's reaction to Tom's discovery was remarkably restrained, almost rehearsed. Her eyes, fixed on the plastic bag Tom held, showed no surprise or panic, but a resigned acceptance that Jenny found unsettling. "Officer," Elaine began, her voice firm and controlled, "I understand the seriousness of this situation. However, I can assure you that this substance does not belong to me and was not in my vehicle before this stop." Tom snorted, clearly irritated by Elaine's calm. "It's always the same story, isn't it? It's never yours. You never know how it got there." But Elaine remained unfazed. She maintained eye contact with Tom, her posture upright and dignified. "I respect your authority, officer, but I also know my rights. I formally request that a supervisor be called to the scene, and that this entire procedure be properly documented." Jenny watched, fascinated and disturbed by Elaine's composure. It was as if she had prepared for this moment, as if somehow she had anticipated that something like this might happen. Elaine then turned to Jenny, her eyes conveying a silent message that the young officer couldn't fully decipher. "Officer," Elaine said softly, "I hope you're paying very close attention to everything that's happening here." Elaine's calm seemed to destabilize Tom, who had expected resistance or panic. Jenny, on the other hand, found herself increasingly intrigued. There was something more going on here, something beyond the obvious injustice of the situation. Elaine's reaction wasn't just that of an innocent victim, but of someone with a plan, someone who was perhaps several steps ahead in a game that Jenny didn't fully understand. Tom's frustration with Elaine's unwavering calm drove him to a new level of pettiness. His face twisted into an expression of disdain as he looked her up and down. Well, well," Tom began, his tone laden with malice. "Looks like someone's been overindulging in comfort food, huh? Maybe that's why you need these little drugs to perk you up." Jenny felt a wave of disgust at her partner's comments. Elaine, a middle-aged woman with a robust figure, maintained her dignified posture, but Jenny noticed a brief flash of pain in her eyes. Tom continued, seemingly fueled by his own venom. "You know, for someone who claims to be an executive, you sure don't care much about your appearance. That hair. Looks like you lost a fight with a hairdryer." Elaine took a deep breath, her voice trembling for the first time since the confrontation began. "Officer, your comments about my appearance are irrelevant to this situation and highly inappropriate." But Tom was far from finished. "Oh, sorry if I offended your delicate sensibilities. Maybe if you spent less time eating and more time exercising, you wouldn't need to resort to illegal substances." Jenny could no longer stay silent. "Tom," she said firmly, "that's enough. Those comments are completely out of line and have no place in a police investigation." Tom shot an angry look at his partner, but the damage was already done. His demeaning comments hung in the air, a testament to his prejudice and lack of professionalism. Elaine, for her part, maintained her composure, but Jenny could see the emotional toll in the woman's eyes. The dignity with which Elaine endured the verbal abuse only highlighted the baseness of Tom's actions. As Tom continued his tirade of insults, Jenny's gaze was drawn to a detail on Elaine's wrist. The sleeve of Elaine's blazer had ridden up slightly, revealing an unusual scar, It wasn't an ordinary mark. It had a distinct pattern, almost like a symbol or a small barcode. Jenny frowned, intrigued. The scar seemed old, but its precise shape suggested it wasn't the result of an accident. Elaine must have noticed Jenny's gaze because she subtly adjusted her sleeve, covering the mark. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Jenny had the distinct impression that Elaine was gauging her reaction. Jenny's mind began to race. What kind of mark was that? Could it be related to some sort of organization? Or maybe it was a scar from an unknown medical procedure. The discovery added another layer of mystery to the already enigmatic L. Daniels. Jenny wondered if the scar had any relation to Elaine's surprising calm in the face of this unjust situation. Tom, absorbed in his own display of power, seemed oblivious to this silent exchange between Jenny and Elaine. But to Jenny, it was as if a new world of possibilities had opened up. She made a mental note to investigate later if she had the chance. Something more was going on here. Something beyond the obvious injustice of the situation. The scar on Elaine's wrist was like a piece of a larger puzzle, a puzzle that Jenny was determined to solve. As Tom prepared to handcuff Elaine, she calmly raised a hand. "Officer," she said in a surprisingly firm voice, "I have the right to make a phone call. I'd like to exercise that right now, before we proceed." Tom hesitated, clearly irritated by the interruption of his moment of triumph. "Make it quick," he growled. With deliberate movements, Elaine retrieved her phone. Jenny watched closely as Elaine dialed a number that seemed to have been memorized. The call was brief, lasting no more than 10 seconds. "Phoenix Protocol activated. Location, 5th and Main Corner. Estimated time, 20 minutes. That was all Elaine said before hanging up. Jenny felt a shiver run down her spine. The message was clearly coded. But to whom? And what did Phoenix Protocol mean? Tom, impatient and oblivious to the significance of the moment, snatched the phone from Elaine's hands. "No more games," he said, starting to handcuff her. But Jenny couldn't ignore what she had just witnessed. Elaine's calm, the mysterious scar, and now this cryptic phone call. Everything pointed to something bigger at play. As Tom led Elaine to the patrol car, Jenny noticed a subtle shift in the woman's posture. There was an air of expectation, as if, despite the seemingly terrible circumstances, Elaine knew things were about to change drastically. Jenny looked at her watch. 20 minutes. Whatever was going to happen, it would happen in 20 minutes. The young officer felt that she was on the brink of something monumental, something that could change not only the course of this case, but also her career and perhaps even the police department as a whole. Jenny observed Elaine with growing perplexity, her mind in turmoil. Elaine's almost supernatural calm in the face of such an unjust and potentially devastating situation didn't fit the profile of an ordinary victim of police abuse. Jenny's trained eyes picked up on small details that seemed out of place. Elaine's posture, while seemingly submissive, had an underlying air of confidence. Her eyes, far from showing fear or despair, seemed to be calculating, observing, almost as if she were gathering information. Jenny recalled Elaine's reaction to the planted drugs. There was no surprise, no panic, only an acceptance that was almost expectant. And that mysterious phone call, Phoenix Protocol. It sounded more like the code for a secret operation than a desperate plea for help from a wronged citizen. The young officer felt her sense of duty and her intuition in direct conflict. On the one hand, she knew Tom was acting completely unethically and illegally. On the other hand, there was something in Elaine's behavior that suggested she wasn't just an innocent victim in this game. Jenny wondered, was Elaine really surprised by this situation? Or had she somehow anticipated it? And if that was the case, what was the real objective here? As these questions piled up in her mind, Jenny felt the weight of an imminent decision. She knew she needed to act, but the right direction to take seemed increasingly unclear. A whirlwind of memories flooded Jenny's mind, transporting her back to her first year on the police force. She saw herself again beside Michael Jordan, her first partner, a respected black officer with 15 years of impeccable service. Jenny vividly remembered that fateful night, a routine patrol that turned into a nightmare when Marcus was accused of using excessive force against a white suspect. Jenny knew the accusation was false. She was there. She saw everything. Marcus had followed protocol to the letter, but the body cameras mysteriously failed that night. It was Marcus's word against the suspects, who had political connections. Jenny testified in Marcus's defense, but her rookie voice carried little weight against the system. Marcus's face, marked by disillusionment, still haunted Jenny. "The system wasn't made to protect us, Jenny," he said the day he cleaned out his locker. "Sometimes justice has to come from outside." Marcus was forced to retire, his reputation in tatters. Jenny carried the guilt of not having done more, of not having fought harder against the injustice that destroyed the career of a good man. Now, watching Elaine face a similar injustice, Jenny felt the weight of that memory. She had sworn to herself that she would never again stay silent in the face of abuse of power. But the complexities of the current situation made her question, what was really the right path to take? With Marcus's memory still fresh in her mind, Jenny felt a wave of determination surge through her body. She couldn't allow another injustice to occur right before her eyes. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, ready to confront Tom and expose his illegal actions. "Tom," she began, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "This has to stop. We can't go through with this arrest. I saw—" But her words died in her throat when her eyes met Elaine's. To her amazement, Jenny saw a faint smile on the woman's lips. It wasn't a smile of relief at seeing someone finally intervene on her behalf. It was something more calculated, almost satisfied. The smile lasted only a second before disappearing, but it was enough to make Jenny hesitate. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile this new detail with everything she had observed so far. Why would Elaine smile at a moment like this? Could it be that she wanted this to happen? The Phoenix Protocol. Could it be part of a larger plan? Jenny felt the weight of her decision increase exponentially. Intervening meant not only challenging her partner and potentially risking her career, but also diving into unknown waters. What was the real game here? And whose side should she really be on? With her heart pounding, Jenny realized that every second of hesitation could change the course of events. She needed to decide, and decide quickly, whether to continue with her intervention or step back to see how the situation would unfold. Tom noticed Jenny's hesitation, and with the cunning of a predator sensing its prey's weakness, decided to strike. He stepped closer to her, his eyes narrowing and his voice low, laden with threat. "Be careful what you're about to say now, Thompson," Tom hissed, his breath hot on Jenny's face. "Remember that incident in your first month? What happened at that nightclub?" Jenny felt her blood run cold. That night, she had promised herself she would never think about it again. A lapse in judgment, a moment of weakness that could have cost her career before it even started. Tom continued, his voice a venomous whisper. "I covered for you that night, remember? Made the report disappear, convinced the witnesses to stay quiet. You owe me, Thompson. And now it's time to pay up." Jenny felt the weight of that secret pressing on her chest, threatening to suffocate her. She had worked so hard to redeem herself from that mistake, to be the best cop she could be. And now, Tom was using it against her. Think carefully before you open that mouth of yours, Tom concluded, stepping back with a satisfied smile. Some truths are better left buried, aren't they? Jenny was paralyzed, torn between her desire to do the right thing and the fear of seeing her career and reputation destroyed. The nightclub incident was her secret shame, something she swore would never interfere with her duty. But now, confronted with Tom's threat, she wondered, how far was she willing to go for the truth? The air between Jenny and Tom seemed electrified, charged with tension and unspoken words. Jenny, despite the fear that threatened to paralyze her, found a reserve of courage she didn't know she had. "No, Tom," she said, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength with each word. "What happened that night was a mistake. Yes. But it doesn't justify perpetuating an injustice now. You planted evidence. That's illegal and goes against everything we swore to uphold." Tom laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Look at you, all full of morals. You really think you can change the system? That you can make a difference? Wake up, Thompson. The world isn't black and white like they teach at the academy." Jenny felt her determination waver for a moment. Tom's words echoed doubts she had already had. Was the system really that corrupt? Was there any hope for real change? "It may not be black and white," Jenny retorted, "but I know the difference between right and wrong. And this," she pointed at Elaine, still handcuffed, "this is wrong, Tom. I can't stand by and let this happen." But even as she spoke, Jenny felt doubts growing in her mind. Elaine's enigmatic smile, the Phoenix Protocol, the woman's surprising calm. There were pieces of this puzzle that didn't fit. Tom sensed her hesitation and pressed on. "You don't know anything, rookie. There are things happening here that are beyond your comprehension. Sometimes we have to get our hands dirty to keep the streets clean." Jenny shook her head, fighting against the confusion and uncertainty. She knew Tom was wrong, but she also felt that there was more to this situation than she could see. The truth, she realized, was an increasingly nebulous concept. The verbal confrontation between Jenny and Tom was abruptly interrupted by the soft sound of an approaching engine. Both officers turned their heads toward the source of the noise, momentarily united in their surprise. A sleek black sedan, with no visible identification, was slowly gliding down the street toward them. The tinted windows prevented them from seeing who was inside, adding an aura of mystery to its presence. Jenny felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something unsettlingly familiar about the vehicle, something that made her think of Elaine's mysterious phone call. "Phoenix Protocol," she murmured to herself, her suspicions growing. Tom, on the other hand, seemed more irritated than worried. "Who the hell are these people?" he growled, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun. The car stopped a few meters from the scene, its engine purring softly. For a moment, nothing happened. The air seemed charged with anticipation, as if everyone were holding their breath, waiting for the next move. Jenny looked at Elaine, expecting to see some reaction. To her surprise, the woman's face remained impassive, but there was a glint in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A mixture of anticipation and triumph. The silence was broken by the soft sound of a door opening. Jenny saw a figure emerge from the back seat of the sedan, but the backlight from the setting sun made it impossible to distinguish their features. At that moment, Jenny had the absolute certainty that the events to come would change everything. The game, she realized, was about to change drastically. As the mysterious figure emerged from the black sedan, Jenny felt a sudden clarity, as if all the puzzle pieces were finally beginning to fall into place. Elaine's supernatural calm, the coded phone call, the enigmatic smile. Everything pointed to an inescapable conclusion. This was no ordinary traffic stop gone wrong. Jenny watched intently as the person from the car, a tall man in an impeccable suit, approached with determined steps. There was an aura of authority around him that even made Tom step back slightly. "Officer Thompson, Officer Stevens," the man greeted, his voice deep and controlled. "I'm Special Agent Carter. I'm afraid you've inadvertently interfered in an ongoing federal operation." The shock on Tom's face was palpable, but Jenny noticed a glint of recognition in Elaine's eyes. Suddenly, the Phoenix Protocol made sense. It wasn't a call for help, but a signal that the operation had reached a critical point. Jenny's mind raced. Was Elaine an undercover agent? Was this entire scenario, from the traffic stop to Tom's planting of evidence, part of a larger plan to expose corruption within the police force? As Agent Carter began explaining the situation, Jenny felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She was relieved that Elaine hadn't been a real victim of police misconduct, but the realization that she had been an unwitting pawn in a larger game was unsettling. Jenny knew that the revelations to come would shake the department to its core. She wanted to make a difference, to fight injustice, but she never imagined it would happen like this. As she listened to Agent Carter, Jenny realized that her career and indeed her entire worldview were about to change drastically. The black sedan glided smoothly to a stop, its engine silencing with a soft purr. The back door opened slowly, creating a palpable moment of suspense. A tall, imposing figure emerged, his movements deliberate and full of authority. The man who stepped out of the car was the personification of power and confidence. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his presence commanded immediate respect. His eyes, sharp and observant, swept the scene, taking in every detail in seconds. As he approached, Jenny felt a shift in the atmosphere. Tom visibly tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon. Elaine, on the other hand, seemed to relax slightly, as if the arrival of this man signified that a plan was unfolding exactly as expected. With a fluid motion, Elaine freed herself from the handcuffs, surprising both Tom and Jenny. Her demeanor instantly changed, the previous submission giving way to a confident and authoritative stance. "Special Agent Elaine Rodriguez, FBI," she announced, her voice firm and clear. "This operation is now officially over." Jenny was left speechless, her mind struggling to process the twist. Tom, on the other hand, visibly paled, the realization of the colossal mistake he had made etched on his face. Elaine continued, addressing Jenny directly. "Officer Thompson, your integrity during this operation did not go unnoticed. As for you, Officer Stevens," she turned to Tom, her gaze stern, "your actions will be thoroughly investigated." The man who had stepped out of the car approached, his presence dominating the space. In a deep, resonant voice, he introduced himself. "Captain Mark Daniels, Internal Affairs Division." The shock was palpable. Tom, who had moments before made derogatory comments about Elaine based on racial stereotypes, now found himself face to face with a black superior. Jenny, for her part, felt a wave of recognition. The name Marcus evoked memories of her former partner, making her question if there was any connection. Captain Davis observed the reactions with keen eyes, his expression a mix of severity and a hint of satisfaction at seeing Tom's evident discomfort. Tom's face was a mask of shock and horror. His previous racially charged words now echoed in his mind as he stood before Captain Davis. He opened and closed his mouth several times, unable to form coherent words. His gaze nervously darted between Elaine, Captain Davis, and Jenny, desperately searching for an escape, an explanation, anything that could save him from the situation he had created. Sweat trickled down his forehead as the reality of his actions and their consequences began to settle in. His world, built on deep-seated prejudices and abuse of power, was crumbling before his eyes. Jenny watched her partner with a mixture of pity and disgust, seeing clearly for the first time the extent of his prejudices. "Officer Thompson." Captain Davis addressed Jenny, his voice softer now. "You were a crucial part of this operation, although you didn't know it." Jenny felt a wave of conflicting emotions: surprise, confusion, a touch of pride. I don't understand," she stammered. Elaine intervened. "Your reputation for integrity caught our attention. We needed someone on the inside, someone who would react naturally to the situations we created." Jenny processed the information, realizing that every moment of doubt, every internal struggle, had been observed and evaluated. She wasn't sure if she should feel honored or used. Elaine, now fully in her element as a federal agent, began explaining, "This operation has been ongoing for months. We've been investigating a network of corruption that extends across multiple levels of the department." She continued, detailing how they had mapped out behavioral patterns, identified problematic officers, and carefully planned each step of the operation. "Today's stop was the culmination point," Elaine revealed. "We needed concrete evidence of misconduct, and unfortunately, Officer Stevens, you provided exactly that." Jenny listened intently, amazed by the operation's complexity and horrified by the extent of the corruption that had gone unnoticed for so long. Captain Davis turned to Jenny, a slight smile softening his stern features. "Officer Thompson, your conduct during this operation was exemplary. You demonstrated integrity, compassion, and the courage to question unjust orders." Jenny felt her heart race, anticipating what would come next. "It is with great satisfaction that I inform you that you've met all the criteria for a promotion to detective in the Internal Affairs Division," Captain Davis continued. "We need officers like you to lead the change in our department." Jenny was momentarily speechless, realizing that her commitment to justice had not gone unnoticed, filling her with a mixture of pride and renewed determination.